All right, people of faith, let's take another walk. We're starting a new series and we're going to continue. Excuse me. We're talking about riches and we're talking about two forms of riches. And we're going to go into depths about why riches are so important in the natural and, and why riches are important in the spirit aspect of man. Okay, there's two versions of us. As every individual, there's two versions of them. There's the the old man or the old creation, which is serving sin and death. And then there come about the new creation, which is serving life and life more abundantly. Life more abundantly, well, life more abundantly or more of abundance is without toiling, without turmoil, without pain and suffering, without remembering of anything of hurt, harm, and endangerment or anything that negates them from prospering or their soul prospering. So in most cases, the old man is full of shame, full of regret, full of condemnation, full of guilt, full of unforgiveness, full of bitterness, full of deceit, full of everything. And very specifically, there's a very specific reason why God wants us to be done with the old man, because it reminds us of a life that we was never meant to know. So instead of going into our mother's womb and starting all over again, God gives us a spiritual rebirth where we can take his spirit and we become something more, and we be done away with the old spirit, which keeps us in remembrance and be familiarized with things that keeps us away from being healthy, our soul being healthy. And we're talking about two forms of riches, and there's the two form of riches can stem from either from two different kingdoms. Each one of them have a set of rules or a format or a foundation how to establish its goods. Now, one is going to establish one would establish goods that will be blessed, and the other one will establish goods that will be cursed. Nonetheless, each one of their kingdom is going to establish their goods. So let's say, like for example, of the kingdom of darkness, would it would establish hurt, harm, and endangerment, ways to embrace hurt, harm, and endangerment, or how to be killed, how to be stolen from, how to be destroyed. Excuse me. And then the kingdom of life or the kingdom of light, it shows how uh, you can prosper in ways that righteousness, joy, and peace. Why those are important to the kingdom of light? Because what good is it to have the blessing, or what good is to have the thing that you asked for and you can't enjoy it, or you don't have the peace to enjoy it, or you don't have the very reason to keep it, to make it more, to give it its purpose. So within those two kingdoms, they both offer a spread for the lack of obedience and the lack of obedience. I mean, well, forgive me, not the lack of obedience, for the actual obedience. Each kingdom has a spread. So for the kingdom of darkness, if you were to obey the rules of the kingdom of darkness, you would inflict hurt, harm, and danger, and you would embrace to be killed, stolen from, and destroyed. And for the kingdom of light, is the reverse effect. You want to bring forth righteousness, joy, and peace, so that so that anyone that's around your vicinity, around your area, around with you, anyone that you come in contact with, won't experience hurt, harm, and endangerment. You will give them things from above that will give them foresight to see what's forthcoming, but it's not just forthcoming for the sake of them to gain, periodly. I mean, or for them to gain and carnal things, things that are of the world. Let's say it that way. You would give them the advantage. Well, of course, it won't be you, but the Father talking through you. Give them the advantage how to see something wrong in the atmosphere so you won't have to embrace it, and you can warn those so they won't embrace it. So each kingdom is based upon obedience, but each kingdom has a set of orders to obey. The kingdom of light wants you to be a servant, right? The kingdom of darkness wants you to be served. That's why there's two types of riches. Now, the kingdom of darkness, riches, is based upon physical sight. So the more that you have, the more that you are, right? And the kingdom of light, the less that you have, the more that you are. Why? Because in the kingdom of light, you could do more with less than you actually could do, than you would be able to do more with, than you do more with more. Why? Because the kingdom of light kingdom is based upon no limitations. It's based upon growth and expansion. The kingdom of darkness is based upon the opposite. It's not based upon expansion. It's not. It's based upon actually decreasing and actually being limited. How else can it rule over you? For the kingdom of darkness itself is limited. It 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 doesn't have the life to become more, to show you things new. So it has to keep you in the same mindset to obey the rules of that kingdom. That's why in the kingdom of darkness, when it comes to financial things, I mean, well, value, things that are materialistically valuable, they are full of things that actually is stripped away from its source. Say, for example, in the kingdom of darkness, they would value and, yeah, say it the way, they would value money, right? And of course, we could look at money in two forms. We could look at it in the form of paper as well as its currency. Its currency is based upon fear. The more fear you have to be without money, the more successful you will be in that kingdom. Because you'll do whatever it takes to get it. Because you're afraid to be without it. And ultimately, that's where the addiction is. So, but at the same time, the currency is based upon trees, right? To print the money. So it's away from its source. If you take a limb off its branch, I mean, off the actual trunk of the tree and away from its root line, or if you take the root out of the ground, out of the soil rather, it would do what? It will wither and die. How can it stand? How can it sustain itself? So if you take itself out of its own element, it perishes. And that's what the things that we value of the world, or things that's not for the kingdom of light, but is of the kingdom of darkness. It has a short time span to show itself. In other words, it's not made to prosper. It's not, and what I mean by prosper, it's not made to increase. It's not made to endure. It's not made to keep continually to last. So it fades away and wither. But the kingdom of light riches never fades. It's a seeding seed that continue to rebirth. So for example, if you were to take the fish out in the kingdom of light, if you were to take the fish out of the water will actually, forgive me, the fish will actually still sustain itself because how the kingdom of light is set up by the impossibility of conquering the impossibility. So the fish will have water around it if you take it out the water. Now, of course, we're not talking about from trying to make sense in the physical form. You got to go past the old creation of thinking and go to the newness of thinking, and then as a new creation, where you'll be able to see past the fourth wall. If you believe that there's a limitation, then that's as far as you can go as your limitation. And what I mean by that, and there's two, of course, two ways we can look at that: limitation towards inside hurt, harm, endangerment, and away from hurt, harm, and endangerment. There's two different ways of limitation. So, but here we're talking about the limitations in the spirit realm. There's no limitations if you are in the spirit realm legally. What will give you access to be in the spirit realm legally? Something who have conquered the very thing that's keeping you away from being there automatically. Now, when Adam and Eve when they disobeyed God, they was in separation from him, so they was cast out of the mind of God. Yet when it comes to Jesus, who is considered the second Adam, he obeyed God, so he had the mind of God. So if anybody who be in Christ have the mind of Christ. So Jesus have a set of rules how to be. And in the kingdom of where Jesus come from, love is on top. That means the least is the better or the greater. And if the least is the greater, that means you could do more with less than you actually do more with more. The person say, how is that possible? That's the whole point of it. It's so prosperous, it goes past the realm of understanding it and the natural. It's unlimited to growth because there is no impossibility to stop it. There is no fear or there's no doubt. There's no disbelief to stop it. The only thing that can stop a person from achieving their perfect will for their life is doubt and disbelief, fear-based, which is what the kingdom of darkness system is based upon: serving. It needs you to serve in operation to build up that kingdom so it can actually have life on the earth. What Jesus did on the second day, of course, we're talking about when we're talking about the 3 days of the death, burial, and the resurrection. The second day, Jesus went down and had a fight. That's the day that he actually died, and his spirit went down. Oh, his soul went down to hell's, had a fight with death and so forth, and all the fallen angels, and it was a showing, and he stripped them of all their power, all their authority that Satan rendered. Well, forgive me, that Adam rendered over to Satan by disobeying God. So he stripped them of all that authority over mankind, which means when Adam disobeyed God, he became a foster child, right? He was no longer in the mind of God, so he becomes a wanderer. Is where when you're a wanderer, you become an idler and so forth, and so you become lost ultimately. But he's away from God way of thinking, away from God ways of seeing things. So his thoughts are not like God's thoughts. His ways are not like God's ways. So they become the alternative. So this is what Lucifer became when God found iniquity in his heart. The iniquity was that Lucifer wanted to be like the Most High God. He wanted to sit among the thrones of the congregation, rise above the stars of the heavens. He wanted to be like the Most High God. He wants to rule. So if he wants to rule, then therefore he's in no position to hearken to the voice of the command of God. He wanted to give out the order of command, right? So he's in separation. So from that point on, he created a birth. It's like a revolt, nonetheless, in heaven, where he convinced a third of the angels to come with him and join his side. And those are considered the fallen angels. And when they fail, they fell away from heaven, so they're separated from God. And in that separation, now they and in that separation, now they have a way away from God, which is not of righteousness, of not of joy, not of peace. It's of the opposition. Is there to kill, steal, and destroy. So when the enemy wants us to be a part of his kingdom, he wants to incorporate us inside that kingdom. There is no life without, there is no peace without being inside of God. The enemy tried to convince us to believe that you can have, you can have a piece of peace. You can have, how can I say it? PIECE. I think that's how you, forgive me. You can have a piece of peace, but not have it in its entirety. That's the kingdom of darkness. And that piece of peace is actually an illegal portal. There are portals to go into the spiritual realm, but a legal or legitimate portal is something who have conquered who have taken down the guard from going into the spiritual realm. Let's say, for example, if an individual wanted to go past what they normally would do, their normal routine, there's a guard there that they would have allowed to be there. It's called a limitational guard. And normally it's based upon disbelief, based upon I can't, and so forth. And so it's there. So you would have to go past that guard to do something more. So, like, for example, if a person was doing a push-up and they limited themselves to doing 5 push-ups, right? To go to the next stage, they would have to go past that limitation. They've been doing 5 push-ups for quite some time. And so they would have to go past that guard the guard that they put there was 5 push-ups. That's as far as they can go. So they would have to go past that guard of 5 push-ups, and which would be, say, 6, is to go past that guard. And once they go past that guard, their mind is open to something more. Now, what the enemy wants us to do is to by taking anything off his table, will put a limitation of what God can do with us, or what God can say to us. So instead of, for example, as a child, we had admiration, we had desires, we have ambitions to fly or to do something constructive. So the enemy wants to infuse hurt. So for him to be able to infuse hurt, we would have to take something off his table to have a taste of what his kingdom of darkness is. And once you have a taste of it, you can invite spirits that Jesus has stripped on the second day of all their power from among high. He stripped them of all their capabilities. Each angel had a capability in heaven to carry out the will of God. He stripped them of all of that so they won't be able to have any influence over God's creation. That's what Jesus did on the second day. So, when the second day, of course, he went down to the gates of hell and he took away the keys of death. And he stripped of all the angels, the principalities and so forth, and made a showing of them. And on the third day, he rose to give the Father glory. He rose, of course, ultimately, we know it as the day that he set us free from sin and death, and we no longer have to pay the debt of disobeying God, nor we no longer have to be in a captivity of being separated from the Father. In other words, in that separation keeps us in the debt to disobey God. So by Jesus doing what he did on the third day, he ripped the veil that will separate us from the Father spiritually. So now we could be in wholeness with the Father, in holiness and righteousness, so that we won't be removed away from the blessing. That's like the prodigal son returning back home. So now, once Jesus did what he did on the third day, based upon what he did on the second day, Of course, basically what he did on the first day. The first day, if he doesn't go to the cross, or if he doesn't follow, in other words, the first day, if he doesn't be obedient to God to do this assignment, then there is no redemption for the penalty of what Adam did of disobeying God. So, with all that being said, we in a place with inside of Christ that we can actually become something more. That we could be in a place with God where our soul could be unlimited. It's like a child. A child, before it knows hurt, harm, and danger, it can actually do anything constructive. But the moment that the child knows hurt, harm, and danger, it becomes on a pathway to be destructive. Now, of course, by it having a taste of hurt, it has a taste of destruction. It has it has an invitation waiting for it, for that child to be more destructive, to get rid of what? The pain of the hurt, or get rid of the torment of the thought of the hurt. So to get rid of the thought of the torment of the hurt is to do something that is shameful, is actually to do something that's regrettable, actually do something that will put you in condemnation and guilt. But that's where it becomes illegal. It's a portal nonetheless to get rid of something that's spiritually disrupting your free will. But you would have to do something that's considered illegal, or take something from the table of darkness that's considered illegal to have advancement, which would be a piece of peace. Piece of Peace. You will get a piece of peace. This is where, so like, for example, if a person were to get high, for example, intoxicated, say that way, they get a piece of peace. Their mind, it has a temporary relief. Temporary. It's very minimal. This is why a person will say, don't do anything to interrupt my high or interrupt my flow, because I'm actually separated from the torment of my mind. But it's very, very, very brief. It's not longevity, or it's not of longevity. So that's why it's illegal, because the very thing that they're doing was influenced by a spirit that didn't conquer the limitation of being in peace for eternity, conquering their soul for being in peace of eternity. So eternal life doesn't start when we leave the earth. It starts on the earth. Jesus told Peter that he will receive in this life what is the life to come. So he can receive in this time, but it starts with it starts with the soul prospering. If the soul is not in health, then it's going to experience an unhealthy soul, which is actually full of torment. So this is where an individual has a taste of the spread of the table of darkness from the influence or from the injection of hurt. And once they get a taste of once that hurt is inside their soul, or once their soul is witness hurt, harm, or endangerment, it has the invitation now that hurt, harm, and danger can give an invite to do something that will put that soul more in damnation. So say, like, for example, if I witness a physical abuse, right? I can see somebody being hurt, harmed, and endangered. So now my soul was never made to record that, to witness that, to eat that, to digest that, to meditate on that. It was never meant to do that. It was meant for righteousness, joy, and peace. So once my soul has a recording of that, that recording can play back over and over and over to actually lure us or tempt us or entice us to get away from it. So what it would do, it would lead us to do something that we shouldn't do, which will be not of righteousness, joy, and peace, but it will be of hurt, harm, and endangerment, or to be killed, stolen from, or destroyed. It will be of that direction. So if I witness a physical altercation, I saw a person get harmed, because they're not shouting for joy when somebody is beating them or hitting them, abusing them. Excuse me. And the shouting of joy would be the relief of something of righteousness, joy, and peace, right? So they're doing quite the opposite. They're in agony, they're in misery because something is harming them. Once I see that, it's an invitation now for that recording to torment me. And if I want to be free from that recording or that playing around in my mind, I will have to do something of peace to remove that recording. But in most cases, the enemy comes first because he actually, through that witness of the hurt, he jumps on it for the word's sake. Now, when we were created, God created us in his likeness and his image, so we made one and the same with him. We were made of righteousness, joy, and peace. The scripture says God did not give us the spirit of fear, but he gave us love, power, and a sound mind. So love, power, and a sound mind is the sobriety, it's the free will, it's the balancement and so forth. It's the power, it's the fuel to make that soul go. If that soul is robbed of any of those three, then therefore that soul will crumble. And once again, the soul consists of the mind, the will, the emotion, the intellect, and imagination. So if the 5 components of the soul is robbed away from love, power, and a sound mind, it's going to be rendered over to death, which means it's going to follow a trail that's cursed. It's going to walk a trail that's cursed. And so, but that starts by the influence or the injection of witnessing hurt, harm, and endangerment. Once our soul has a recording of that, for our soul to be in peace, that recording has to be removed. So the enemy comes first to give us a suggestion how to remove it. He comes with the influence of something that's illegal. And why is it illegal? Once again, it's illegal because it didn't conquer the very guard that's there that will permanently remove it from our soul. And that's what make what Jesus did so prominent, particularly to the believer. He conquered sin and death. So in other words, he stripped all the angels, the fallen angels, from all their capabilities of influence in the spirit realm. By Adam and Eve falling away from God or separated from out of the mind of God, when they disobey God, they're no longer was inside the mind of God, so they don't see things as God see it. They don't. Their thoughts are not the same as God's thoughts, so they see it from a secondhand nature. They don't see it. They see it from afar. So when a person gets hit by a problem, they don't see it coming because they're not in the spirit. They are in oneness of separation from the Father, which means they are of the flesh nature. So the flesh is always serving the flesh or walking in the flesh, or the knowledge of the flesh, the wisdom of the flesh is always late in compared to the spirit capacity. So we will get hit by things. Better yet, let's say this way: we would do something that is. We would take an offer that we don't see the ins and outs about it, but we see the ins and out. The way we would see the ins and outs about it is through a limitational wall. So we only can see it so far. This is why we judge things from the outside in. And that will determine if we're going to go inside of that thing we judge on the outside. So there are ramifications of the outside to make it acceptable for us to decide to go inside of it. But even in all that, you're still limited to what's on the inside of that, because you're going inside there in a physical form, but you're going into a spiritual atmosphere. So the enemy wants us to do that in everything of his kingdom. So this is why a person will get intoxicated. A person will get intoxicated to have a piece of peace, even though that's not the intent. The intent is actually to feel good, which is the piece of peace. The feeling good is having a soul to be relieved of pressure, or to be relieved of anxiety, or to be relieved of concerns and worries and doubts and fears, regrets and shame. it's there to relieve them from that, but it's only a piece of it. So take a person, for example, that may have done drugs, and they get to the point where the more you do drugs is the more that you're inviting in illegal spirits to enter in. There's a reason why the drugs were considered illegal, even if the one who is calling it illegal is being hypocritical and actually distributing it. It's still illegal for a reason because it didn't conquer sin and death. It didn't pay the cost that the costs need to be paid for you to have the peace. Now remember, when this goes all the way back to the garden. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God, they was in separation from his mind. Now, being outside of the mind of God is in the abyss of torment. Being outside of God in the ways he's thinking, in the ways that his ways are, or in the ways of his thoughts not being on one accord with God is torment. It's to be inside of torment. And so when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, they was instantly in torment. They can't see anything in the spirit realm before it happened. So they can't see any attack of the enemy who's just coming to do what? He's coming to kill, steal, and destroy them. They can't see anything. The only thing they can do is like, the stories as a child we was told about riding or talking to strangers as kids. They gave us the teaching how, if you don't know them, don't say anything to them. And then they gave the illustration of the white of the van if a man offer you candy and everything else, and don't go to him if you don't know him and so forth. It was teaching us how to be safe, how to it was trying to give us an advancement of how to see something happen before it actually happens, and how to prevent it for the worst thing from actually happening, which could be hurt, harm, and danger for that child. So, but the enemy does that exact same thing. He is that guy. That's where all that came from, where the seduction, where you have the stranger that's often a child candy to lure them away from safety, to go into their custody. So this is what Satan does. So if anybody want to know where all that evil or all those illustrations come from, it comes from him, because this is what he is. He is separated from God. So this is what he did with Adam and Eve in the garden. He seduced them away from God by offering them a suggestion that's something that they didn't even need to know. What he told them was, he asked them a question, and in that question, it put them in the mind of separation from God, but in the mind of him. He asked them, does God not know? No, did God tell you that you can eat of every tree of the garden? So he's already in defiance to God, because he's not on one accord with God. He's in separation from him. If he was on one accord, he wouldn't say anything that wouldn't be what God said or what God didn't tell them. He's actually asking them a question to question God. That's why it's called seducing. It's seduction. So the seduction is to have you the seduction, or how seduction works, is to convince you that it's you, the one that started it, so he can walk away unscathed. So if he can convince you that you are the one that's asking for it, then he don't have to take he can stand up the accuser of you. So that's what he did with Satan. Excuse me. That's what Satan did with Adam and Eve in the garden. So, and due to the fact that they listened to him, they walked away from the mind of God. They're no longer in the Garden of Eden, which is the mind of God. They no longer could see how God see it. There was no separation between God and man up until man disobeyed him. And in that separation, he became a wanderer and all that. So everything he does, he's inside the mind of Satan. So now what Jesus came to do is to get us away from the mind of Satan, or the custody of Satan. The custody of Satan is actually to be inside the mind of him, to see it how Satan sees it. So seeing how Satan sees it is the only alternative. So Jesus will have to do what? He will have to conquer sin and death to get our rights back to the Father, to get our free will of choice back to the Father. So he would have to pay the punishment that Adam, the first Adam, made, which is death itself. To disobey God, the penalty is death, separation from him. So Jesus paid that cost of separation. That's why when you hear the scripture about talking about the veil is torn, there's no longer separation between God and his creation. That means in spirit to spirit. That's not flesh to spirit. That's spirit to spirit. Where the Father can talk to you now, spirit to spirit. Beforehand, there was so many customs and ways about how God had to do it, because there was a wall there that prevented God to go across to reach us. Jesus was 100% physical, but he was 100% spiritual. The spiritual aspect, let's say it this way, the physical aspect of him had to pay the debt of the cost of death. But the spiritual aspect of him, which is the life of God, enabled us to be raised, is to pay the cost so we can actually see the Father in spirit and spirit. So in other words, we can get back into the mind of God. This is where the scripture says, have the mind of Christ. Where when we have the mind of Christ, of course, there's ultimately accepting Jesus, what he did, but that puts us in the fellowship back with the Father, like Adam and Eve was in the garden. So due to Jesus' obedience, life came. But due to the disobedience of Adam, death came, which means separation. Life came means to be one again with the Father. So now we can see it as the Father see it if we're separated from the things of the flesh or the things of carnality. Now, what does that all to say? When a person have witnessed, hurt, harm, and endangerment, Jesus have, by what he did on those 3 days, the death, burial, and resurrection, that is, those 3 days, he no longer, we no longer have to settle for a piece of peace. We can have peace in its entirety. In other words, our soul can actually experience the abundance of life. It could be healthy again. Up until the point of what Jesus did, the soul was considered unhealthy. In other words, it had constant infiltration and remembrance of the ones that of hurt, harm, and endangerment. How did that work? So like if you have a child, an innocent child who never experienced hurt, harm, and endangerment, never witnessed it and so forth, but yet still is raised in an atmosphere that have experienced hurt, harm, and endangerment. So then they are in oneness of that. They will be taught by that, unless God himself can talk to them, which is the sole purpose of what Jesus did, that he can go past the system of disobedience. By him paying the debt of death, and of course, once that debt was paid, he rose and he's alive. And how we will know he's alive, if that life, that risen, can be inside of us, that we will become something more, a new creation. And if we become something, a new creation, that means the debt of the old man of us. Remember, there's two forms of us. The debt of the old man of us is paid. So now we could see things and do things that we have never done before. We could climb new heights that we have never done before. Not in the flesh, but in the spirit. There's so much more to us. But it goes, well, we're still talking about the two riches. Now, in the kingdom of light or life, the riches are in heaven, which is considered unseen. And for that individual, they are considered invisible because they're spirit based. This is where you get that insight of what is to come before it actually happens, so you can see the enemy approaching before he gets there, because you will be in the mind of God. And the only way you can be in the mind of God, you have to be holy. But the only way you can be holy is through be separation from sin and death. So that's where Jesus comes in at those 3 days. For the person for the riches of the kingdom of darkness, it's not a spiritual thing, it's a physical thing. this physical thing is a limitation because the physical realm is stripped away from life because nothing physical has conquered death. Somebody could say Jesus' body conquered death. It conquered the punishment of what Adam did of separation. Every time, so for example, let's say it this way: God is holy, or God is love. Love is God. Love is so pure it is without fear. Why? Because fear has torment. So for us to be able to receive love, we have to be without torment. That means it will require for us, our soul, to relinquish anything that's tormentable or is in connection to something of torment. Once that's done, we can have a healthy soul. So if that's not done to that individual, then that individual is cursed nonetheless because his soul is unhealthy. So if their soul is unhealthy, they resort they resort to a lesser form of themselves, a lesser way of thinking. They don't see it from the highest point of thinking, which is in every angle to be seen, because you will be in the mind of God. So they will see it to a less extent, which is outside the mind of God, which you will see it as a limitational form. But in the midst of that limitational form, there is there may be an accomplishment inside a limitation form. Let's say, for example, so like if you have poverty is a spiritual, is a mental thing, is a mind thing. Poverty is based upon an unhealthy soul. It's full of torment. That's a perverse situation. Any soul that is unhealthy is removed from righteousness, joy, and peace, which means it's deprived of love. Right? It's in it's in separation from love. That's why right. That's why it's deprived of righteousness, of walking in righteousness, joy, and peace, and it's actually in walking in hurt, harm, and endangerment. If you were to see a person who does things in a direction of hurt, harm, and endangerment, is because they are deprived of love. In other words, they are in separation to the rules of love. They have a taste of hurt inside of them, and or they no forgive me, they have a witness or a recording of hurt inside of them that hasn't been removed. And in that, it will lead them. Remember, that's the permission slip, or that's the invitation. That's like a stranger luring a kid with candy to get into their vehicle or something like that, right? So that's what Satan does with witnessing hurt or harm and endangerment. It's like alluring your soul away from love itself, away from God being your love being your father, so that fear can be your father. What Jesus came to do is to destroy all the works of Satan. So he came and did what? He birthed love into the world, which is the kingdom of heaven. He birthed the Holy Spirit, which is love itself, which is the kingdom of heaven. He came to birth your soul prospering, which is free from torment, which is love, because love doesn't have fear, because fear has torment, which is the kingdom of heaven. So he came to birth that. When he birthed that, that is destroying the works of Satan. The works of Satan is like a stranger offering a child candy to lure them away from safety. So Jesus came to destroy all of that so that that individual soul can prosper, which means to be healthy. If the soul is not healthy, it's going to look for ways to be healthy. But there's only one alternative. It's through either through endless peace or a portion of peace or a piece of peace. And a piece of peace comes through the effect of a legal portal. And there's a reason why drugs or intoxication or certain things are considered illegal. It's not illegal because is through due through the restriction of the physicality. It's illegal because it's influencing you to go into the spirit realm illegally. It didn't conquer the very thing that will keep you away from it. So it's trying to invite you into the abyss of what God is without God's consent. But the only way you can be in, if God is holy and we are not, based upon what Adam did, we are descendants from Adam. So we are born into sin and death. We are born into darkness. We're born asleep. So if we're born that way, then how can we be how can we enter the gates of praise of no, the gates of heaven? How can we with confidence and boldness? Because we'd be full of fear. So we'd be afraid of God. But the only way we would be able to be in His presence is to be without that. So that means all that would have to be removed from our soul. But something would, for that to happen, that debt of what Adam and Eve has done has to be paid. So Jesus paid that debt. But if we don't go through Jesus as the one who paid that debt, how are we gonna get to God? How? He's holy and we're not. Somebody can say, well, He created us, but He didn't create us in the way that we're created. He created us through Adam. Adam is a seeding seed, so he can constantly keep rebirthing, right? It's a seeding that never ends. All God has to do it one time. So that goes back to the saying, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? The egg comes first because the egg is the chicken. So the person's like, no, it needs parents. No, that's separation from being inside of God. That's equivalent to saying which one comes first, the ending or the beginning. Inside of God, you will see it that the ending and the beginning are one and the same. Inside of God, you will see the chicken is the egg as one and the same. And if you were inside the mind of God, you will see that Adam is one and the same with God. So he doesn't have an end. The only time Adam has an end is when he's in separation from him. This is why we are asleep, because we're in separation from God. We're not in the mind of Him. If God is eternal and we're inside of Him, what will we be? Eternal. If God is eternal and we're on the outside of Him, what will we be? Not eternal. We will be what considered death. So Jesus came to pay that cost. But if God is eternal, how can we get inside eternity? When God is holy and we're full of unholiness, we're descendants of unholiness. How do we? What can we do to atone holy? Because everything down here is contaminated. Is of death. Is of the cost of separation from God. So what can we do? So something from above have to pay the cost. Jesus came to do what? To destroy the works of Satan. Everything that will restrict us away from being ones with God, Jesus came to destroy it. So how can a person get to the Father or get to love itself without something from above? Person that wouldn't God could talk to us, but God can't talk to us. See, there's order in the spiritual realm. There's order. We live in a world that's of disorder. The flesh and blood is of disorder. It doesn't have conduct. It doesn't have rules. It doesn't follow rules. It lives on its own. It's a separation from God. So God's kingdom has order. Spiritual realm has order. Satan, demons, principalities, all that stuff, they all have order. They can't just do what they want to do without invitation. This is why they need your body to roam the earth. They can't just appear on the earth. When they fell to the earth, that was it. And then once they fell to the earth, Jesus came and basically wrangled them all up and put them down in their place where they are. And the only way they can come to the earth is that we summons them. Remember, Satan is loose on the earth. He's not bound. He's not in the lake of fire yet. So all he needs is one to summons him, to take something from him, and that can spread. Which is what the same thing what he did with Adam and Eve in the garden. He spread it. Now, an individual is separation from that when they go inside of Jesus, because Jesus conquered the reason for being separated from the Father. So there will be no separation for that individual that's inside of Jesus, because Jesus is inside the Father. So we talk about two sets of riches, and the riches and the riches or the richness inside of Christ is far greater than the richness inside of actual the material value that you can basically see. Now, Jesus, the richness in Jesus is invisible. So having the blessing upon you wherever you go. Okay, how about this? The riches of the world comes through labor, one way or another. It either going to come through physical labor or your soul is going to labor. What I mean by that is that your soul either going to pay a debt that you physically don't have to atone. Say, for example, you got a person who is famous, right? And we see all the recognition, the spotlight, we see all the fame, and we even see the fortune. But their soul is going to pay that cost. Because in the kingdom of darkness, nothing comes for free. Their soul is going to pay that cost. The cost to be a star is going to cost you your soul. Because you will have the image of God inside of you. Satan wants it for his gain, to spread his creation, or to populate his creation. So it's going to come in exchange for your goods. So in other words, you will have to become, if God created you in his image and likeness, you are considered incorruptible. So you have to be of the Satan's kingdom, you have to become corruptible. This is where he has to lure you away from the hand of God. And once we sleep, he lures away from the hand of God to follow his ways. And once we follow his ways, we are in separation from God even the more. And now we're taking things from off his table. And why? Because everything we're inside his kingdom, and everything is inside of his kingdom is considered the very best, but it's cursed nonetheless, because we have to work for it. Now, it comes at when God created us, God created his perfect will inside of every person. There's a purpose for every creation that he created, a purpose. And we could say an assignment. So the enemy wants that assignment for his gain, not for God's gain. So the enemy will say, okay, I'll give you the kingdoms. I'll give you notoriety. I'll give you all this recognition if you give me your soul. If you get your soul, he gets the rights of you, which basically you will become his puppeteer. And in his puppet, by being his puppet, you're his servant, nonetheless, a slave. And you would do what he wants you to do because you'll be inside his kingdom. And because that will be all that you will know. And inside that kingdom, you would do things, or he would direct you towards things of hurt, harm, and endangerment to reproduce his will, or to unleash the spirits of torment from his kingdom back to the world. So how does that come into play? Let's say, for example, if a person is an ordinary person, they got goods, they're an innocent person, right? Innocent. But they have the gift of God in them. In other words, they have the soul of God inside of them, the spirit of God inside of them. So say, like, for example, they sing, but they're not singing anything of hurt, harm, and endangerment, because they haven't witnessed any abuse. right? They haven't witnessed any of that. So the enemy has to become form himself as an angel of light. So say for example, you have a girl, a young lady who's innocent, never seen hurt, harm, and endangerment, and she were to see a guy. Now, any guy that she sees, it's like if you were to look at the story of Wonder Woman, Diana Prince. If you were to look at the story of her, the Amazonians, they are a land of women, right? Nothing but women, no men. So any man that they see is going to be considered peculiar. It doesn't matter if he's walking with a limp, he's walking with he's crippled, he's amputated. It doesn't matter if he's cockeyed. He's going to be peculiar because he's not a woman. So in the midst of being peculiar, he can become desirable. In other words, he could become. There's an opportunity for the women to be tempted to go outside their nature. Their nature is nothing but customs of women. So, all right, so they see a guy, and this which Wonder Woman did, or Diana Prince did. She saw a guy, Steve Trevor, I think is his name, and she liked him because he didn't introduce her to hurt, harm, and endangerment. So wasn't she wasn't defensive with him because there was no threat. Even though all she know is women, not sexually, nothing like that. All she know is how women. All she know is people like her. So man itself and everything that comes with man is going to be the opposite of her. It's going to be new to her. But in that newness, it wasn't a threat to her because how it was presented. It was presented to her not to be like I'm man and you're woman. It was presented to be like we're equals. That's how he presented. Now, the enemy does it in a different way. The enemy wants to make it appear. Well, make it appear. He only could do it one way, is to have you that you're missing out on something. But that's why it's cursed, and it can't help but to die because it's not meant for your good. Now, what we just stated, if it's coming to be equal, it's not a threat to you in any form. If it's coming to be superior, or in any form, in any way that it shows that it's superior to you, it's a threat to you because that's your free will. It's coming for your free will, which is your soul, right? So if you have this innocent girl who meets this guy, she's going to be open to him if he's not a threat. So the enemy is nothing but a threat because he is without righteousness, joy, and peace. He's of death, theft, and destruction. So he has to appear to be. This is why he has to use things as bait to lure you away because he's not what he is. He's not what he's appearing to be. So this is where you get the guy who tries to look good or tries to be good to lure the woman who have never witnessed hurt, harm, and danger. Otherwise, there's no way that he has a chance with her because his whole world is in the opposition of how she is. So that's how it was. For example, with women or with Wonder Woman, that's how it was. And so she meet this guy, and she loved him because he introduced her to equality from a man's perspective. And that's how it was meant to be when God designed it for man and woman. When Adam and Eve were together, they were equals. Adam wasn't his head. Forgive me. Adam wasn't her head because there was no reason to be a head because there was nothing to root. There was nothing for Adam to protect her from. The moment that they disobeyed God, they became a separation from God. They out of the mind of them. So then now they can have, they are, if you're not in the mind of God, you're not equal with him. So in that, in not being equal with him, you are in separation from him. And in that separation, that's all in the mind of Satan. So Satan is not equal with God. Remember, he wanted to be like God. So how can he be equal to him? He's not. So if he's not equal with God, he's going to try to do everything he can to be equal with God. And if you have a person who's innocent from hurt, harm, and danger, he has to lure them away from the hand of God to come to his side to have them to reproduce. This is how he lures the person for the fame, the fortune, and the kingdoms of the land and all that good stuff. Remember, that's what he offered Jesus. But Jesus was a child of the Most High, and in his devotion to be obedient to God, there was no reason for him to walk away from God, even death itself. Nothing was going to separate him from God. So when you take something, with the two kingdoms we're talking about, not family, we're talking about the cost of the riches. There's two types of riches. There's a righteousness of the kingdom of life, and there's a riches of the kingdom of darkness. If you were to take something of the kingdom of darkness, the riches that is, you're going to work for it. You're going to physically work. A person said, well, then how else can we have it without physically doing it? That's the whole point. You are asleep. You are asleep. That's why you're physically awake. That's why you're physically working. If you were awake, you would spiritually be in the know of past what's been done. Everything that's put like this, everything we do to make an earning, right? To make money has been recycled. There's nothing new. Work is nothing new. Physical labor is nothing new about it. It's the same repetition, regardless if it's a different occupation. It's still nonetheless it's the same task over and over and over. There's nothing new about it. So in the midst of that, you're stuck there because it's serving death. That's all in the kingdom of darkness. That's toiling. That's part of a punishment. That's part of you being in the custody of someone who doesn't have your best interest. They want you to be their servant and slave. That's why you become high ranked in that kingdom as a master to issue out, to distribute those to serve and so forth. That's the kingdom of darkness. But in the kingdom of life, you was made to be equal. If you're equal with God, then y'all on the same mindset. God is not a threat to you. You're not a threat to God. So what do you need to fear? There's nothing to fear. How can you be without if you're equal? How can you toil? How can you work for something that you're equal with? Does that mean that you tell God what to do? You have the spirit of Satan to do that. So you wouldn't be allowed inside the mind of God. Remember, Lucifer was kicked out when God saw iniquity inside of him. The moment that he saw that Satan wanted to be like the Most High God, that he wanted to exalt himself among the stars and the amount of the face of the deep and so forth, he wanted to be like God. He was cast out. He's no longer equal with God anymore. He's cast out. So you're in separation if you're not equal. Now, Jesus is the only one that gives us the rights to be equal with God because Jesus did what? Conquer sin and death. So if an individual doesn't believe that Jesus conquered sin and death, well, then how can you be equal with God? So that means you're on the outside of him. That means you're stuck in, you're asleep. That means you're stuck in the physical realm and you're laboring, you're toiling. So then inside that kingdom of separation from God, a house, money, fame, everything else, all that becomes the highest accomplishment. Highest, because it's all of the physical nature, because it all came from physical creations of God. The money comes from the tree and so forth. And the man who has the power, who have conquered the person who was of fear, they get more power, or they have the power to basically to initiate terms of acceptance. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Until they are overthrown. Remember, in the kingdom of darkness, there is no equality. Everybody's not one and the same. So whoever can overthrow the one who is in charge is the ruler in the kingdom of darkness. But no one can overthrow Satan. So it becomes a crab in a barrel for everybody else in the kingdom of darkness. But in the kingdom of light, everybody is equal with God, because there's no threat of opposition. There's no threat of anyone trying to oppose God to be higher than him, because everybody's walking through his love. So that's the difference of the kingdom of the. If we were to go further into depth of the two kingdoms of riches, the kingdom of riches of God is spiritual, because you will be with the one who gave you the access to have that spiritual nature, to be all knowing. So if you're all knowing, having money, having fame, having fortune is actually crumbs of the earth. From the physical standard, is crumbs. If you are in the mind of God and you have the same mind as he does, why do you need this? Is what Satan was presented to Jesus. Jesus has the same mind of God, the same thoughts of God, the same purpose. Jesus is one of the same with God Almighty. One of the same with him. So Satan is asking him to give all that up for the kingdom, for the fame, for the fortune of the earth. You do the math. Jesus had absolutely authority on the earth. Why did he need kingdoms and everything? Why did he need the fame and the fortune? This is why you will have to be of darkness to agree that Jesus had children and that he is not Lord. You have to be of darkness, because the individual that can't see him as Lord is the individual who can't see why he came here in the first place. He didn't come here to be Lord. He came here to conquer the ways of Satan so you could be equal to God again. To be equal, to be inside, is to be inside the mind of God. God looks at it as not robbery. He looks at it as one of the same, because you don't want to quarrel with him. You don't have this. You don't have a nature to want to overthrow God, because you would have to be cleansed from every part of your nature. Everything that's you have to be cleansed from everything that will separate you, that would actually influence you to want to oppose God. This is what it means to be becoming a new creation. A new creation is that you don't have anything of the old nature that will have you to oppose God. And in that opposition to God, you are not one of the same as him. You don't think how he thinks. God is always right, because he always walks in love. He's always willing to serve. But he doesn't serve evil. What he does, he conquers evil. How does he conquer evil? He doesn't just kill evil. Forgive me. He doesn't kill or destroy evil. Like if there's one of his creation inside of evil, what he does is have them to walk away from it. He shows them a way how to walk away from it, which actually destroys evil. Jesus didn't destroy evil, like cast it to the fire. That's fear talk. That's what we want God to do for us. Well, if God is so powerful, why don't he just throw Satan into the fire and we will be free from all that? No, he wants us to conquer it. How do we conquer it? By showing us that there's a greater way. So even though we are in the mind of Satan, he will go inside the mind of Satan to show us a better way how to get out of there. And that will conquer the evil inside of us by walking away from it. So, say for example, if I was struggling with any addiction, right? And any addiction is the actual thought to be without it, right? If I was struggling with that, for me to conquer that is for me to actually to face that thought of being without it. If I can walk away, when that thought is saying, what are you going to do without me? If I can walk away from it, I would have conquered it. And that's what conquering evil is, to walk away from it. But we're talking about two kingdoms. We're talking about not just two kingdoms, but we're talking about two sets of riches. In the riches of Christ Jesus, you get it all because you are in oneness with the Father. You are equal to the Father. Somebody would say, no, that's heresy. That's blasphemy. How could one be equal with God? That's the whole point of it. If you have the same spirit of him and y'all are the exact same, how are you not equal with him? The reason why you can't see it as you're not equal with him, because you don't have the same spirit as him. Adam and Eve, let's go here. Adam and Eve were equals to one another because they had the same spirit. That's why it didn't matter who came first. It doesn't matter who created who. It doesn't matter. They are the same. Eve wasn't the head of Eve. Adam wasn't the head of Eve because there was no reason to be the head of her. There was no threat. There was no reason to protect her. With everything that Adam had, she had. Everything that Eve had, he had. They was one of the same. Why? Because it was one of the same with the Father until the moment of separation happened. The moment of separation happened, they're instantly in the mind of Satan, and they see it how Satan sees it, which is a life away from God. And in that life, Satan will have you to believe that that's the very best that life can get. That's where the lie repeats itself, and you're stuck in that cycle and being stuck in that cycle makes you redundant. And in that redundancy, you become old, so you perish. If you ever hear a person to say that they're getting old, or they applaud how old they are, they're stuck in a cycle of what? Repetition. They haven't done anything new in years and over time. Let's say it that way. They haven't done anything over time. How can they? How can they do anything how can they do anything new when they haven't got past? They haven't let go of the thing that's of the old nature that's restricting them to becoming something more. So in the midst of doing something old repeatedly, they bring a new person into that oldness, and they think that they're doing something new. That's how the kingdom of darkness is actually produced or repopulated. It has to recruit something that's not of his nature and influence it. That's how it advances. That's how it becomes something more. But in that, it's not new and it's not something more. It's just new to those who are of that kingdom because they are stuck behind a wall. They can't go any further. They are in separation from God. So how can they see any more? So it's like a person that believes that the life of serving and walking in the flesh is the abundance of life. And it's not. There's so much more. So the riches of the kingdom of God goes past what you see. So when you look at, if you were to look at someone like Abraham, you look at somebody like Job, or you look at someone like David, if you were to look at someone like Moses, if you were not I want to say Moses, if you look at someone like Jesus, I'm going to say Moses, but I wasn't going to say Moses because I wanted to focus on riches and everything else. But if you look at all those, look at look how they have one thing in common. Look how extremely spiritually blessed that they were. They had a capability that goes past the point of limitations because they was inside of God's mind. I mean, it was one of the same with God. It was equal with him. And when your eyes are open and you become a new creation, you never die. So you don't have to fear it. So somebody would say, like, no, we all have to die. No, 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 no. There's two. Okay, so say for example, Earth is the middle ground. You have life beneath the earth and you have life above the earth, right? Earth is the middle ground. Where you go next, or where you evolve next, is either you're gonna go up or you're gonna go down. So the ways that you would have been doing in the middle ground would determine if you're gonna go up or go down. But you never end, nonetheless. With that being said, my people of faith, you are the blessed. Let's be the blessing. Let's keep walking.